Welcome to the LDHR Podcast, where ministry leaders grow together. Over the next few months, we will be releasing episodes intermittently alongside our other series to talk about growing on purpose, highlighting the people and pathways for growing where you are and with what you've been entrusted. Through these episodes, you'll hear from people with insights and practical steps that you can apply right away. You'll also have the opportunity to find out more about the resources that are available to you and how you can intentionally grow on purpose wherever God has you. Come on in and listen. We're so glad you're here. Gina Butz, welcome to the LDHR Podcast. I'm so happy you're able to join me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. I love the global LDHR community. I used to be a part of it. So yeah, excited.
Glad you're here. So we've been working through a series called Growing on Purpose, where we highlight tools and resources available to our staff to grow both personally and on teams. But before we begin, can you just tell us a little bit about your crew journey and where you are currently living and serving?
Sure. Been on staff for 28 years this summer. I started at the University of Minnesota, and then my husband and I went overseas for 13 years to East Asia. That was where I started to get more involved in the leadership development aspect of our ministry. It was also there that my husband and I went through a program called LEAF, Leadership Evaluation and Formation, in 2005. And that was so transformational for us. So that led into a journey of me starting to be a coach with LEAF in 2008 and then taking over leadership of the program in 2017. So it's been 9 years since I've been in that role. We moved back to the States in 2012. My husband was the global VP of operations for about 12 years and recently stepped onto the U.S. side to be the U.S. operations director. I was on the Lake Hartston team from 2020 to 2024, which was really great. I just absolutely loved being in that space. And then we had to shut the program down. So since then, I still have been the LEAF director, but I'm also just sort of a project manager for the re-envisioning for HR. And kind of hop from project to project. But my heart really is just for our staff and for them to thrive. And so whatever I can do to that end is great.
Great. Wow. What a staff journey so far. Sounds like God has used you in many ways and taking you to some really great places. For those of us who are used to working with tools that give us maybe like a snapshot on our strengths, on our personality, or maybe about a season of our life, and those can be really helpful. But sometimes growth requires us to maybe slow down, take a deeper look. Why do you think it's important to move beyond the snapshot and really examine our lives more holistically?
Well, simply put, because the past is not in the past. We are a sum of everything that has happened to us and the relationships and experiences that have shaped us. There's a great quote from the book, The Road Back to You by Ian Cron. We share this at the LEAF program. It says, as long as we stay in the dark about how we see the world and the wounds and beliefs that have shaped who we are prisoners of our history. We'll continue going through life on autopilot, doing things that hurt and confuse us and everyone around us. Eventually, we become so accustomed to making the same mistakes over and over in our lives that they lull us to sleep. So waking up is part of what it looks like to examine our lives holistically. Going back to the beginning, to those formative relationships and experiences that we had. If we don't do that, it really limits our leadership in significant ways. It limits our capacity to love freely and from a place of deep rest and security in the Lord. Because they're often unexamined beliefs that we unconsciously hold that lead us to form defensive strategies that protect us from pain. They provide a place for us, but we get stuck in them. And it feels like, well, this is just who I am instead of this is something I have learned to do. So, for example, for me, I carry beliefs in my story like it's all up to me, no one's going to help me, or my emotions are too much, they're too messy. And so those beliefs led to strategies about not asking for help, holding it together when I'm really struggling. And I've had to unlearn those strategies and what it means. And what that takes is to address those origin stories of those beliefs. I think about what Jesus said in Isaiah 61. When he started his ministry, he quoted Isaiah 61 and he says, I came to bind up the brokenhearted and to set the captives free. And we always say, how can we invite him to heal wounds we have not named or free us from prisons that we have not named? So I think that's part of the value of looking back.
That's really powerful. I like one of the phrases you said in there of waking up, that it just seems like, yeah, I mean, things are there, whether we recognize them or not. And to be able to name them can allow God to actually heal them. In your experience, what are some signs or indicators in our lives that show us it might be time to pause, step back, and go a little deeper?
Well, I think there's clear big signs like burnout. That should obviously make you go, how did I get here? And it's not just I did too much. There's an energy that got you there. There are messages that got you there. But I think it can also be smaller things like noticing when you have a reaction that feels outsized or disproportional, or maybe you keep getting the same feedback and you don't know how to change. Those are the places to be curious, I think, about what's going on underneath and where might that be coming from in my story. Maybe you have a message that you realize drives you a lot, like, I have to get it right, or I'm not good enough. When did you decide that was true? And is it true? I'm like, probably not. It's good to go back and look. I think a really easy tell is contempt. Self-contempt shows up as that inner critic speaking harshly to ourselves after a mistake, or using sarcasm to avoid tenderness or pain, shutting down during a conflict, needing to feel superior in order to feel safe. But other contempt can come out as things like judgment, mockery, criticism, even outrage. Contempt usually comes to the surface when there's some kind of pain that is being touched or some desire that's going unmet. So it's a good place to stop and be curious.
That's really helpful. Yeah, if you have a bruise like on your arm or something, you might not notice it, but as soon as it gets poked, you're like, ow. So yeah, in the same way that when you see contempt, I like thinking about that. That's interesting that either self-contempt or focused on other people can be a sign that, oh, someone's poking that bruise. So what is that bruise? What do you think tends to hold people back from doing this kind of deeper work? Is it busyness, fear, uncertainty, or something else?
I think it's different for everyone, probably. I think what holds a lot of people back is thinking that there isn't value in going back. Some people will say, in Christ, I'm a new creation and the old is gone and the new has come. So why would I go back? But I love the way that Pete Scazzero puts it in Emotionally Healthy Spirituality when he says, Jesus is in your heart, but grandpa's in your bones. In other words, you've been shaped by your history. It doesn't stop affecting you because you say it doesn't affect you. I think for other people, it's probably fear. What am I going to discover when I look back that I'm going to have to name, that I'm going to have to engage? I think it's a little bit like having a closet in your house where you've just kind of tucked things away and you're hoping, like, maybe if I put it back there, it's gone. It's not gone. Nothing in the closet is gone. And it's scary to open that door because you don't know what's going to come back out.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of us, it's just that we don't want to have to re-engage the pain of what we know is in our story, because going back and examining old wounds means we'll have to feel them again. But the value of doing that is that when we do it with Jesus, he wants to bring healing. He wants to bring comfort that you might not have received that first time around, and you don't outgrow a need for comfort. Yeah. Like, that is still there. It still needs tending.
That makes so much sense. And that analogy of the closet and things just keep stuffing back in there and doesn't go away.
Unless those things don't go away because you don't give them space.
Yeah. We talk a lot about self-awareness on this podcast. When you think about that, especially emotional self-awareness, what does that really mean and why is it so foundational for growth?
Yeah, I'll refer to Pete Scazzero again. I think it's really profound when he says that we can't be spiritually mature and remain emotionally immature. They're deeply connected. I read recently that the two best tools that a leader can have are a mirror and people in their lives who can help us make sure that we're viewing the image in the mirror correctly. In other words, like, emotional self-awareness is the practice of holding up that mirror to say, what's going on here and where is it coming from? And who in my life can help me understand more deeply why I'm showing up the way that I am? We know this as leaders. If you don't get to the root issue, you're not going to change. So the roots go deep and we have to get to the bottom of them. And about emotional awareness is that our emotions they're storytellers, and we need to learn to read what they're telling us. So our emotions are coming from messages about what we think we have to be, what we think we have to do to find acceptance, to find respect, to be safe. And oftentimes those messages are not based on the gospel. They are lies from the enemy, like you can't fail or you're on your own. And we need to know where those lies came from so we can renounce them, or they'll continue to have power over us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes those lies are very sneaky. Just becomes your self story of what you tell yourself. So when we talk about growing intentionally, I think about engaging our whole selves, like mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. What does it look like to truly show up holistically in our growth, especially when it comes to engaging not just our minds, but also our heart?
When I think about being self-aware, I've come to realize that my first tell is often in my body, because our bodies don't lie about how we're really doing. So I realized recently I was feeling this tightness in my chest and my breathing was shallow. And that made me realize, oh, I'm feeling anxious. So I had to ask myself, what am I thinking about that's leading me to be anxious? And when I recognized that, it's okay, I have to take that to the Lord. And I know there's a whole story behind why I'm feeling that particular anxiety. But I think that's the kind of holistic attention that we need to engage, because all aspects of our being are so intertwined. I see a lot of leaders ignoring their physical bodies and just pressing on as though they don't matter that much. You've probably heard if you don't take a sabbatical, your body will take one for you. And I think that's very true. And what a good God we have, that He speaks to us through our whole beings, our bodies, our hearts, our minds, and we just need practices of paying attention to all of them. Let me give you an example related to engaging your story of how important our bodies are in storytelling as well. So I was driving years ago when we lived overseas, and out of nowhere, this memory came to mind of something that happened to me when I was 8 years old. I hadn't thought about that for years, maybe decades, but my body was physically flooded with anxiety as I thought about it. So much so that I thought I would maybe have to pull over and wait. Now, like if I had just thought of that story on my own, apart from that feeling, I might have dismissed it. Like, oh, it's not an important story. But feeling it so strongly in my body was a sign that I needed to take it seriously. And I felt like that was really a gift from the Lord. And that's a story that I've had to share with people and uncover how do I live out of that today even?
Wow, that's really powerful. I can
Yeah.
remember a few times too. All of a
Mm.
sudden, memory pops in your head and thinking, wow, okay, where did that come from? But yeah, that there is a physical response to that too. And I think paying attention to that physical response is honoring and dignifying that God has created our bodies, that they are important, they do matter. And so, yeah, when we ignore them, we're ignoring part of what God has created that is good and beautiful. And kind of moving on from there, we know that God has created us each uniquely. And part of that uniqueness is shaped by our stories, the experience, patterns, themes of our lives. How
Mm.
does understanding our story help us better engage with our growth and how we show up day to day?
Yeah. Let me give you an example of
Mhm.
something that happened to me. So I was 5 years old. I took a drama class, and our theater director was a very intimidating woman. So she told us to pretend to be an animal. I was very small as a 5-year-old. And so I went and I fit under a little chair, rolled in a little ball, and I heard her come over with this angry energy and demand to know what I was doing. And I remember feeling so confused because I was doing what she told me to. And I can still hear my little voice go, I'm being a ladybug. And then her demeanor completely changed. And she let out this just like beautiful laugh. Like as I think about it, I remember how my body filled up with joy. So in that moment, something really powerful happened. I felt both the shame of disapproval and the absolute joy of her delight. Now, you might think, well, that's just one moment. Is it really that important? But those are the kind of moments that shape us. There's so much in that story. It was part of this broader story of growing in my God-given gifts as a performer, but it also just drew a line for me, this heightened desire to figure out, not just with her, but with everyone in my life, what does it take for me to avoid your disapproval and get your approval? Which of course meant I had to develop a strategy of reading people well and adjusting my behavior to their expectations. Now, like there's a gift that God has given me naturally to be able to read people well and respond to them, but
Yeah.
the enemy from that story really exploited my giftedness and my glory. That's what he does. He exploits the message. So I haven't outgrown that desire for people's approval. I wish I could say that I have, but I'm aware of it. And I've become aware of when that temptation rises in me to abandon authenticity and try to shift into something I think someone would approve of more. So, there's that lie that the enemy planted that day, like who you are is not enough. You have to impress people for them to love you. And I love how Steve Cuss puts it in Managing Leadership Anxiety when he talks about, he says, when we're under pressure, feeling threatened or anxious, we depend on this false self, which is what, we would say, those strategies, rather than depending on God. So if we can learn to notice when it's at play, then name what we think we need that we don't actually need, then die to it, then we can be freed from its grip. And I love this phrase he uses, Jesus died so I don't have to blank, So for me, it's like Jesus died so I don't have to seek people's approval. But it could be in control, be perfect, have all the answers, save the day, fill in the blank for yourself, right? And I think the only way to know what grips us that deeply is to go back and explore our stories and give them weight. It's really easy to think of something that happened to us and be like, yeah, it wasn't that big of a deal. First of all, when you think of the number of things that we experience in our lives, the fact that we remember something is significant. And I think if you remember it, Jesus wants to engage it. He doesn't discount anything that has happened to us.
Wow, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that story and just the transformation that God
Yeah.
has taken you in through that story. I resonate with that a lot. And I think when you talked about how the enemy likes to exploit those gifts that he has given us, I think that just sparks something in me to be like, it's not just our things that we mess up with or our sins, but it's like actually it is a gift that God has given you to be able to read people well and engage with people, but that the enemy wants to exploit that. And sometimes that happens. And so going back, and as you said, when the fact that we actually remember a certain event out of all of the millions of events that have happened in our lives, I think that is definitely significant. Now, for someone who has never really taken time to reflect on their story, what are some simple, practical ways they can begin to do that?
Yeah. I'd probably start by reading the book Make Sense of Your Story by Adam Young, or listening to his podcast, The Place We Find Ourselves. Dan Allender's book, To Be Told, is also really helpful. I think one simple practice is writing a life map. You could write out your life by decades, like 0 to 10, 11 to 20, etc. And for each decade, write down who were the most significant people and what was your relationship like with them. And really dig down, like, how did they respond to you when you were sad, angry, scared? Did they apologize for their mistakes? Did they celebrate not just what you did, but who you were? How do they speak to you, right? Did they engage in your world with curiosity and delight? And then write down for each decade the high points. What were the things that brought you deep joy? What were the hard things? And then what were the core messages that came out of those decades? And can you notice themes of the high points? Like, well, these were times when I felt like I really belonged, or I could express my gifts. And what are the themes of the low points? Maybe loneliness or feeling unseen, experiencing loss or shame. And what conclusions could you come to about how those things impact you today? Or here's a really simple exercise. If you don't have time or you don't want to engage in a whole life map, just think about your significant relationships, parents in particular. Keep in mind, parents are fallible human beings. So no, they did not love you perfectly. They couldn't. And we need to name the ways that they weren't able to do that well, not to blame them, but to see where you might have formed a wrong way of thinking about yourself or the world, or particularly God. Can you see how your relationships with them affect the way you view how to use authority or how you show up in conflict, good and bad? Can you see how they shaped your view of God and how to relate to Him? And then I think if you've done the work of a life map, write out the individual stories in as much detail as possible and start sharing those stories with other people. I've been starting with a counselor or someone who's doing their own work because it's important to have someone respond who has the capacity to hold that story well, to hold it with empathy and kindness, and help you reframe the narrative in light of the gospel. In The Place We Find Ourselves, It's episodes 117 to 120. He does a series about how to engage people's stories well. I would highly recommend people listen to before they try to engage in that kind of work.
Those are some really great suggestions, from kind of simple where to start to kind of the bigger picture of doing the whole life map, sharing some of those stories. And we'll make sure we link in our show notes to some of these great resources that you're sharing so people can easily find them. As you have done this work in your own life, Gina, what have been some maybe the most surprising or most transformative things for you personally?
Yeah. So I grew up with an older sister who's mentally challenged, but I didn't talk about it really with anyone. Shaped my life in hugely significant ways, which I was completely unaware of really until I was in my probably late 20s and 30s. And I started to talk more about it with people. It began when I shared with a friend just what it was like. She asked me, what was it like growing up with a sister like that? And she listened. And when I was done, she said something really simple which was, Gina, that sounds so hard. And I didn't know how to respond because I had never put that word to it. That was just my life. I didn't know. But that kind of thing has happened again and again as I've shared parts of my story with people. I remember sharing a story with a counselor about something that happened to me in middle school. And I told the story with such contempt for my younger self, like, oh, it was so stupid that I did this and it was so foolish. And he finally stopped me and he said, Gina, you were 12. And it was such an invitation to kindness. And there have been those invitations as I've shared my story to see it more clearly, to see it with eyes of kindness and compassion, because that's how God views my younger self. And that kindness extended to the younger parts of me gives me kindness for myself today. You know, Brene Brown says that when something happens to us, we write what we call a stinky first draft about what happened to us, right? I'm a writer. I know first drafts are garbage. You never publish a first draft, but that's what we do. Something happens to us, we make an interpretation of it and we hit publish. This is the story. We need other people to come and hear those stories and help us see that's actually not true. We have to rewrite that narrative. My husband and I were blessed to, as I said, attend LEAF in 2005. So LEAF is a week-long coaching intensive that takes people through a deep dive into their stories and how they've been shaped by them and how they're living out of them today. It was such a huge jumpstart of helping us engage our stories. But I would say the real growth for me has happened since 2020. A good friend of mine who'd also been through LEAF came and said, hey, I've got this friend and we'd like together work through our stories. And so we started with our life maps and then we just started sharing individual stories with each other. We've done it regularly since then. And we each would take time to share and then the other two would have a question or insight, observation. And what's so beautiful is that on a neurological level, healing happens when we share our stories in the presence of empathetic witnesses. That's scientifically proven. And I've felt that. There's not a single story from my childhood that is significant that they have not heard at this point. And so then we started to process what we're doing now and what's happening to us now. And what's crazy is we have these people who know our history and we'll share a story and one of us will say, well, of course that's hard for you because it reminds me of what happened to you when you were 12. And it's the same message. And so there's just been a lot of healing in that small group of sharing with people.
That's beautiful. Thanks again for sharing your journey, and what a blessing to have others to come alongside you. Of when you were saying before about sharing our story with a trusted person who can show kindness, and then your counselor was able to show kindness in that story of you're 12, and thinking about, well, I have an 11-year-old and 13-year-old right now, but just when they share things, that kindness of it's okay, but maybe we don't think of it in the same way as we look up onto our younger selves. And then just, having people around you, that it's not happening just in a bubble, in isolation. That healing happens by sharing in a community that is kind and empathetic.
So we can tend to think that we had the same wisdom at age 5, 8, 12, whatever the story is, that we do now. And we can judge that younger part of us for the conclusions we came to. I've heard it said that kids are the best collectors of information and they are the worst interpreters. So kids are just trying to survive. And that's how we figured out how to survive. And we can have such compassion on that. The counselor friend that I mentioned, he always loves to say, Gina, you come by this honestly. Right? We all do. We come by these things honestly. Again, we have to be compassionate toward it.
Yeah. You've already given us lots of different resources. You've talked a little bit about LEAF. What are some other tools or practices you found helpful for people who want to pursue a deeper holistic growth?
One simple practice that I found really helpful, there's a couple, the Yurkoviches, who wrote a book called How We Love, and they have a website you can go to, and one of the downloadable resources is this journaling awareness worksheet. And it helps you walk through an event asking yourself, what did you feel? What did you do as a result? What messages come to mind about God, self, others? Then importantly, when have you felt this way before? And it helps you think back to where's the connection here and how much of what I'm feeling is actually because of that event. So there's an invitation in it to experience the comfort that maybe you didn't have. And so it's something I'll work through with the Lord sometimes when I've been through a difficult thing and I'm not sure how to process it. And then I want to turn around and share that with someone else as well, because that's, again, part of their healing process. I think learning about attachment style is really important. I picked up 2 books recently, The Emmanuel Promise and Landscapes of the Soul. And they're both helping explain attachment style, where it comes from in our stories, how our formative relationships have shaped attachment, and how those show up today, particularly in Emmanuel Promise about causes us to relate to the Lord. So those are 2 books I'd really recommend. And then I think the practice of transformational prayer is a really helpful tool if you have access to that. I think it's helpful when we keep having a particular reaction to something. Maybe you're easily triggered to anger or anxiety. And I think through transformational prayer, we can follow that thread back to what story the emotion is pulling at and invite God to meet us specifically in healing ways. In fact, I've actually done transformational prayer about that story I shared, being a 5-year-old crawling under the chair. And God just gave me this beautiful picture of him like poking his head under the chair next to me and being like, hey, kiddo, what you doing? I'm like all proud of myself. I'm like, I'm being a ladybug, I'm like, yeah. And just basking in his delight in me, his interest and his care. And that's now the picture that comes to mind when I think of that story. And when I feel pulled to prove myself, I want to come back to that face saying, I just delight in you as you are. Right? I've heard a lot of people say that they've had similar experiences through transformational prayer that way.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing some of those. Yeah. So what would be one mindset shift you would like our listeners to walk away with from our conversation today?
You have a story and it matters. Don't discount anything that happens to you. It's so important to keep a posture of curiosity and compassion toward ourselves, because there's a story behind everything that we do. And that story is worth knowing. It's a story God wants to engage. And the more we do, the freer we are, the more rested we are. It's a difficult process, but it's so worth it.
It's a beautiful way to wrap up that we each have a story and it matters. Thank you so much for this conversation, Gina. It's been really great just going a little deeper into why it's so important to go deeper. So thank you so much for joining us today and for your wisdom and your insight.
Yeah, thank you. It's been good to be with you.
Thanks so much for joining us today. These are the kinds of conversations that remind me how important it is to pause and really pay attention to what's going on in our lives, not just on the surface, but underneath it all. I hope this gives you a starting point for taking the next step in your own growth journey. If this episode resonated with you, we'd love for you to share it with someone who might benefit from it, or take a moment to subscribe so you don't miss future conversations like this. And as always, we're really glad you're here. See you next time.